This time of year can be a time that things can drift a little bit off track, or it's a bit of a danger time anyway, because you've had enough time for the enthusiasm of planning for next season and starting your training for next season to wear off. You've had enough time to accumulate some fatigue from a few weeks or maybe a month or so of training. You might have tried to increase the volume a little bit, and that might be starting to tire you out a bit as the weather gets worse. And all these things can build up over time. And of course, we're coming up towards the end of the year. You can't quite see into next year or your goals for next season. So getting over that hump, the sort of psychological hump, can be a bit demotivating. The reasons you might be struggling specifically, there are, 4 reasons I've come up with, are that you might be doing too much, you might be doing too much intensity, you're not getting enough recovery, and your plan's overly ambitious. Too much intensity can be a problem. So I find that most people can handle maybe 1 or 2 high intensity sessions and 1 long session a week. Some people can manage 3, but maybe when you're younger or people are a bit more explosive, can recover from high intensity work a little bit better. So if you're a bit of a sprinter, you might be able to handle a bit more high intensity, but then you might not be able to manage with as much volume. You might find that doing a bit less volume works better for you. But anyway, in general, doing too much intensity and not recovering from it is a good way to overtraining, fatigue and things going a bit off track. And then of course, attached to that is not enough recovery, not enough easy riding, not enough time off, not enough easy running if you're a runner. So you need to take the time off, you need to recover and add enough ups and downs into your training plan. So if you're trying to squeeze in too much volume on top of a very busy work schedule or family commitments, then that can mean, you can just lead to being overly fatigued, particularly at this time of year when the weather's probably not as good. So other factors, you have to take more time getting changed, you have to clean your kit a bit more, and actually you've just got to keep yourself a bit warmer, certainly if you're living in the northern hemisphere. And of course if you're living in the southern hemisphere, where some of the people that I work with are, there are other factors at play. It can be getting quite hot now and you might be struggling from that a bit. Also connected, it might be that your plan's too ambitious, and that might not be because of the volume, that you're trying to do too much volume, you're being over ambitious on the volume. It might be that it's overly complicated, so you might be trying to include too many factors, where if you simplify the plan a little bit, mentally it's less stressful, and also that means that physically it's less stressful, and you can probably handle a bit more volume in a fairly simple plan than you could in something that's a bit more complex or has a lot of bits and pieces in it, whereas just getting out once a day and doing something specific that's simple, and you do it the same thing every week, same interval session every week, on the same day every week, means you don't have to think about it. You just get out and do it, your body adapts and you get fitter. But if you keep changing everything every week because you think you might need to stimulate a different system or add some sort of complicated training session, that adds extra stress because you've got to remember the session, you're not used to it, you need to learn to execute certain types of training sessions, and as a consequence that can mean that you're doing too much. And if it's overly complicated, then you're using that mental energy and it's hard to then build up the motivation to actually do it. Whereas if you know exactly what you're doing, you just need to get on and do it, and it's easy to just sort of make yourself follow a process, so to speak. And of course you might have been doing the same thing for a few weeks and it might not have felt too bad, and it might just be starting to make you struggle a little bit. But remember that we can handle quite big jumps in training for a short period of time. So if you're using, say, Training Peaks and you've got this training stress score for a certain week, or you're doing, say, 8 hours a week every week, 3 weeks of 8 hours is a lot more than 1 week of 8 hours. You might be able to handle it and feel great in the second week of your 8 hours a week, but you might not feel great in your third, and you might not feel, you might feel absolutely dreadful if you try and do 4 weeks of it. So remember to have light and shade during your training week and also week on week, and have a bit of a plan, have a framework and adjust it as according to how you feel. If you do find things are drifting off track, then the thing to do is get back to basics. And what I mean by that is just get back to some basic week that you can sustain. It might be that you do the same rest week every 3 weeks or something like that. So just try going back to that. For me, I have this thing that I call 5 5s and a 10, and that harks back to when I was in my 20s. I found that I could always do But I was a runner, so I could run 5 mile runs a week and 1 10-mile run a week. And when I started cycling and stopped running, I still had this 5 5s and a 10, because I used to simplify my runs, and I used to assume that all my runs were at 7-minute miles. So 5 miles was 35 minutes. What's 5 miles? About 8 kilometres. So 35 minutes. So I've got 5 35-minute sessions, 1 70-minute session. And then once I'm able to do that week on week and things have settled down and I'm in a sort of recovered and stable condition, then I make one of the 5s a hard session. I'll maybe do an interval session or fartlek or something. So then it's still 5 5s and a 10, so the volume's still the same, but I'm introducing a little bit of intensity. And I might do that with another run, or I'll probably actually, if I'm able to handle that, then or the athlete that I'm coaching is then able to handle that, then I might start to increase the volume a bit to get back onto the training plan and the trajectory that we've got for the goals. So you're getting back to the baseline so that you can still then start to build from that baseline. And if things start to go wrong, you just drop back a bit to that baseline. So you've got a known datum to work from. You might ask, how do you know you're at that datum? How do you know things are settled down? Well, obviously you'll feel better, you'll be sleeping better. If you're taking regular metrics, like subjective metrics, how you feel every day, what's your motivation every day, and also hard metrics like resting heart rate variability. And it's really at that point when you feel like doing more, all your metrics have dropped back to a nice base level, so you're understanding that things are working as normal, you're sleeping well, you're not grumpy, you're reasonably happy and you're well motivated. You can then start building up. And I wouldn't do that. I'd do that in a fairly ad hoc way. Because if you make a plan, you might think, oh, well, I've got to do that because it's in the plan. I've got to do an hour a day this week and then 90 minutes a day the next week or something like that. I've got to 8 hours this week and 9 hours next week, 10 hours the week after. Whereas if you just think, right, next week I'm going to try and do an extra 10 minutes on my endurance sessions and make my long session 20 minutes longer or something like that, and see how you feel after that, then you can just build up week on week and then take a step back if you need to, maybe take a step back every 3rd week. And once you know you're up to something meaningful sort of volume, then it's time to start a plan. And of course, if you've got a particular goal, you want to make sure that you're on track to achieve that goal. So you do need a plan at that stage, but I wouldn't do that initially. So, like Steve Peters and we've talked about before, like accept that you need to sort things out and move on with a plan, AMP, and I quite like that. It's applicable to various scenarios. And actually during this ad hoc building process, I'd just try and increase the volume. I wouldn't try and increase the intensity too much. Just get one hard session, one interval session that you can do, keep doing it every week, just the same session. Get one long session that you do, keep doing it, and then if you're going for an ultra long event, you might want to increase that one long session, the volume of that, or if you're going for shorter events, you might want to increase the overall volume of each day or something like that. But that can be just specific to what works for you and what works for your particular event. And a few bonus things, if you want to call them bonus things, a few other things to bear in mind. You might lose some fitness. There's certainly some chance that you lose some fitness if you have to back off your training volume quite a lot. But it's better to lose a bit of fitness now than to dig yourself into a hole and have to have a month off or get ill or whatever. It's much better to take control of the situation so that you can deal with it and get back on your plan. Sometimes it's not necessary to do all this, step back to the basic week, spend weeks doing this basic week. Sometimes just a few days off, if you can spot things quickly enough. If you're taking your hard metrics and your heart rate variability starts to drift down, you might think, oh, well, I better take a few days off. And that might be enough to just get back on track. So don't be afraid to take a few extra days off if you're feeling tired, because that might be all you need to maintain that consistency and continue to build your fitness. So you don't have to make a big formal plan, you just try something. If it works, a few days works, great. If it doesn't work, then you might have to do something a bit more. And of course, if you've been overdoing it, like if you're particularly overreaching, a few days off or even a couple of weeks off might be beneficial. You might actually find that you're fitter after taking some time off and letting your body adapt. It's like going on a big training camp where you do a big overload, a couple of weeks, maybe a big overload period, and then it can take a week or two to recover from it before you see the benefits. If you spot it quick enough and don't end up in overtraining, in a chronic overtraining state, then a few days off or a week off or 2 weeks off can actually see you getting fitter. But obviously don't plan to do it that way. And finally, well, my opinion is it's better to work with duration rather than distance. If you say you're going to go out for 45 minutes or 90 minutes or 3 hours or whatever, then all you have to do is get the time in. And some days you'll feel good, you'll go further, and some days you'll not feel good and you'll need to back off a little bit. And giving yourself permission to back off is much easier if you know you're just trying to get some time in than it is if you're trying to get some fixed distance or altitude gain in. Like I mentioned earlier, the 7-minute miles, I assumed that I always used to run at 7-minute miles, and okay, a lot of the time I probably would run a lot faster than that. But because I just assumed that, that's all I had to worry about. I could do my 5-mile run, 35 minutes, 10-mile run, 70 minutes. And I didn't have to worry about it. I didn't have to add up numbers. I didn't have to use a bit of string, because in those days we didn't have GPS. I didn't have to use a bit of string to measure my route. I just thought, well, 35 minutes is 5 miles and that's good enough. And it was good enough. It works really well. So that's it. Don't do too much. Don't do too much intensity. Give yourself plenty of rest. Don't make it too complicated. Remember that fatigue accumulates over time. So just 1 week of a given volume might be okay, but 5 weeks of a given volume might be too much. If things do drift off track, get back to basics. Once you're back to a stable level, check your metrics and your subjective feeling, and once you feel like doing more, start to do more. Build up in an ad hoc way at first, and then get back on plan and move forward with a plan. Accept the situation, move forward with a plan. And good luck, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.